So there's this idea of like exploration of consciousness and expansion of the mind and the heart. And I wanted a piece of that. How is something terrifying and comforting at the same time, and just so exalted, pure light and love in a way that is really kind of inspiring. I just want to channel God into this dimension. Yeah, we're stretching our minds very, very wide, very far. And that's not always a great thing. Sometimes things are terrifying, and sometimes people just have psychotic thoughts and they don't know how to square them with reality. And the mind it's both resilient and fragile. And so sometimes people think, well, if I just take more sacraments, then I'll work it out and I'll get to go to heaven. Whereas it's sometimes more likely, there's a good chance that you'll go insane before you get to heaven. In a word, I'm looking to transform experience into insight. Did you really gain insight, right, about the nature of your predicament and also the true nature of who you are? And so how do we have conversations within ourselves to make peace? We're mining for gold here.
And we are here in the end is to enjoy this experience, right? As much as we can. So you can get out of balance like both ways, and just because you are always into therapy, that doesn't mean that you are some kind of superior being or you are doing better than others. Hello and welcome back to my podcast, Ayahuasca Avatars. And today I'm here with Daniel Shankin from Tam Integration. And this is the first time we meet kind of in person in the virtual space, but I've been receiving his emails and following his work for a while. And if you follow my podcast, you know that I'm most passionate about the integration work, right? When you are on the medicine path. So I'm so excited to connect with Daniel and have him to share his journey and his wisdom on this podcast. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you so much. And I'm honored. I'm surprised sometimes when I discover people are actually reading the emails. Try to put a lot into them. And it's nice when it comes back and I get to make connections with people who are awesome and, that I respect and things like that.
Wonderful. So let's dive in and just share a little bit about like your personal journey and how did you come to the medicine, which medicine you are working with and how your life's changed, like thanks to this work, that you've been doing in the past few years.
Right. Well, I mean, I am one of those like early adopters as far as my own personal history. Like I was one of those young kid, a high school kid who was experimenting with, I was smoking pot and eating mushrooms and, eating acid and things like that and listening to my parents' hippie record collections. And that was sort of my doorway in. And, at the same time, I sort of also had like a little bit of a fledgling yoga practice because my grandma did yoga. And so she showed me a couple of poses. She gave me my first yoga book. And so, I was also very aware that like the Beatles, they rode that line as well, right? Where they got very interested in meditation and spirituality. And at the same time, that was fueled by their psychedelic exploration. And then what really the icing on the cake of all of that was that they were like deeply creative people. And so I was really inspired by the art and the music of psychedelic culture. And so I sort of came into it that way through the art and the music, which I still deeply appreciate and love, both classic music and modern music. And, really enjoy looking at the visionary art that comes out and around. And that's really what inspires me and continues to do so. Kind of what happened when I was, later on in life was it changed. There was this natural evolution of kind of recreational to kind of spiritual and therapeutic. Whereas you're hanging out with your friends and you're having fun. And then all of a sudden I kind of started to learn how to meditate. And then that started to bring stuff up. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like I want to grow as a person. And then the mushrooms were like, oh, do you now? It's like, well, why don't you work on all of this? And I was like, oh, right. I have a lot to work on. And it seemed like valuable work and it seemed like important work. And so I started to do it. And at the time, when I sort of started having these kind of series of awakenings, I'm by no means like awakened, but I'm more awake than I was, I guess. It's all levels, it doesn't matter. But as I started kind of hearing this call, we were saying before, this kind of call to be of service and to help out and to kind of share the love, as it were. Uh, Psychedelics weren't really a job. You know what I mean? There were like three, there were like a couple of therapists in Berkeley, right? And like I knew there was some shamanism happening, in South America, but back in those days, you almost kind of hoped you didn't have to go, right? It's like the people who went to, we would suggest people would go to Peru for healing, like if they were really having a hard time, right? Like if they needed deep healing, like it didn't seem recreational. But so, the idea of becoming a shaman, like what didn't even occur, it still doesn't occur to me. But, there's a lot of people who do have a couple of trips and they're like, oh, I'm a shaman now. It's like, it didn't occur to me, but I knew that I wanted to support people. And so I started training in sort of, healing modalities, various forms of body work and, meditation teacher trainings and yoga teacher trainings and energy healings and various workshops on Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and things like that. Because that's kind of what was available. And, even though I was just kind of, this is late 90s, early 2000s. And then, the psychedelic kind of thing started to bubble up and, it was more and more of my clients kind of wanted to talk about these things. And I was like, cool, let's talk about these things. And, you know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I heard about something called integration circles, right? And there was only a couple of people doing them. There was, I mean, of course, like if you sat with a community, if you were at a ceremony, there would be like there'd be an integration circle at the end and you would talk to those people. But for kind of the wider population, um, there wasn't sort of inclusive integration circles. And I thought that might be a good idea. Cherie was doing them. I think Baltimore was doing them. And then, so I started doing them and it was really, really rewarding. And that sort of started kind of TAM integration as it exists now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I'm really curious about, your personal struggles and transformations and breakthroughs because for me, I had some serious issues that I dealt with in the past, and Western medicine completely failed me to give any answers or long-term solutions. And that what kind of pushed me into first holistic medicine and then later shamanism and working with sacred plants. And I often find that people who are devoted to this path and this work, one of the big reasons is because, they experienced some real transformation and breakthrough with these modalities that they couldn't do, in any other way. So do you have a story like that to share?
I'm pretty ADD. They call it ADHD now, but I was ADD ever since it was just called ADD. Um, my nervous system is funny. It runs a little hot. It runs a little, it's a little bit fried. It's very, very sensitive. It's one of the interesting things about having a thing like that is that, psychedelics can't cure it, it can kind of help manage it and it can kind of show. And so instead of it being a cure, it's a catalyst. As far as it being a catalyst, it can be a little frustrating. I know I'm all over the place, but that's the ADD for you. Because you'll have an experience and you're like, oh, I see what I need to do and how I need to live. And I'm cured now. And everything is just going to be neat and organized. And then a week later, it's not. And you're like, oh, I failed. And so one of the things that I had to come to terms with is that there's not a cure, there's management, right? There's practices. Having these psychedelic practices kind of helps guide me into what other regular practices are going to help me, if that makes sense. Because, I can't do mushrooms every day. I'm getting too old, that'd be a lot. But I can meditate every day and I can journal every day and I can move my body every day and I can be careful about what I eat every day. And I can work to simplify my life regularly, right? And so having those pointers to, oh, you want to have a simpler life. You deserve time to just relax. Journaling helps you organize your mind, right? Because the thing about my mind is I can think a million different things at once, and that can be a little overwhelming. That can be stressful on my nervous system. When I'm journaling, I can only write one word at a time. And so all of a sudden, I'm all of these sort of divergent thoughts that are going all over the place kind of get pruned down. It's like, oh, okay, I'll just think about one thing right now. And what a load off, right? While at the same time, um, creating a certain perspective that helps to kind of release those old self-judgments at the same time. It's like a lot of us are walking around under a crushing weight of self-loathing. And we'd probably be happier if we didn't. We have to figure out a way to kind of put that stuff in perspective so that we can start to let it go.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, because I think like a lot of people come to medicine because they really struggle with something in their life and they want some kind of change, desire, right? Some kind of change, and even like they can completely recover or not. But as you said, like these plants can open certain doors that help us to, first of all, to accept ourselves and love and embrace ourselves as we are, and then to find better ways to navigate our everyday life that results in like a greater happiness and ease and less stress, as you said. So I really relate to that.
Well, I also want to put one footnote on this. So remember that I started taking LSD when I was 13, and I was doing it because it seemed awesome, right? That was the doorway. And I suppose, one could make an argument that I was self-medicating or that I was running away from this or I was doing that. But again, like I found my parents' record collections and, I was listening to the Woodstock soundtrack and things like that. The psychedelic seemed part and parcel of that culture. And, I was also aware that it was awesome and it was fun and that it was consciousness raising. So there was this idea of like exploration of consciousness and expansion of the mind and the heart. And I wanted a piece of that. So there wasn't really a conscious understanding that I was somehow unwell, right? And to what extent, I feel like I need to own any kind of like wound. I don't know. Like I came to it because I was looking at people that I respected, like the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead and Pink Floyd. And it seemed like they were doing awesome, amazing things. And I wanted a piece of it. So, and that's kind of why I'm more geared towards coaching than therapy, is because these things work for healing too. And I found a lot of healing that I wasn't expecting, but they're also for awesome people who want to be more awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love to give, different approaches and perspectives on this to people who are listening, because my journey is a little bit different, and people who listen to the podcast know a lot about my story. But, I had a great deal of suffering in my life, that pushed me into this path, because I was looking for solutions and answers. And I'm a therapist, originally a psychologist, and then, trained in many modalities as yourself, and came to shamanism. So my focus is more like therapy oriented, and I deal with a lot of people who, tried everything and nothing worked, and this is kind of their last resort. Okay, let's go to plant medicine. And but it's so true. I agree with you that you can have different focus and intentions of approaching, these practices, and it's not only to heal something like chronic disease or something like that, but it can be, to expand further. And I have many friends who are artists, musicians, painters, who came, to medicines to expand their creativity, and to bring in more of that energy and translate it into art. And that's so beautiful, because like music, for example, is such a universal language, right? And that's something that everybody can relate to, even people who are not suffering from some disease and not looking for necessarily. And I find that's one of the beauty of the plants, that you can take the same plant in the same context, but everybody gets, what they are looking for, and they have very different experiences and different outcomes. So I'm really curious about, like you mentioned mushrooms before, so I assume, that's one of the medicine you work with. That did you have like specific callings to certain kind of medicine? Did you explore more different plants? Do you feel that you're kind of, have a special connection with one or the other, or how was your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I mentioned, I'm fairly content with. I've worked with other ones. I've tried ayahuasca once or twice. I think small doses of San Pedro are quite wonderful for dancing. I think 5-MeO-DMT is really interesting and strange. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like things that are serotonergic. I'm easy. I don't necessarily need to run around and collect molecules and things. I really like the kind of sustainability and accessibility of the mushroom, right? It's like there's never going to be an article that like psilocybin mushrooms are threatened with extinction, right? Is there over harvesting of mushrooms? There already seems to be more mushrooms in the world than anybody can eat. It's like the amount of, decriminalization in most cities just means that more people have a bunch in their freezer that they're afraid to eat, and so there's something kind of really nice and kind of egalitarian about the mushroom, and also just the ancientness of it. I kind of like it, like requires no alchemy. It requires like, barely any science. It's like, back in the day, it's like they were there and you'd eat them. You didn't have to know anything. And so for simplicity, I think that they're really great for simplicity's sake. Of course, I have a long love affair. I grew up on acid. There's something really remarkable about that as well. And, maybe it's because, I'm a Western guy and it's a Western medicine, or maybe it's just because I'm just used to it. Doesn't mean that sometimes it does, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work me over sometimes or scare the shit out of me, but it's an old ally.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that, because I only had a handful of experiences, and I'm curious that, some people have real judgment about, okay, is this synthetic or man-made versus, comes directly from nature, like mushrooms, as you said, without any alterations. Even though I think you can argue with acid that, that comes from nature, because I think it was like a type of fungi on rye or something, like one of the components, I can't fully remember. But my question is that, when you work with mushrooms, obviously you feel the presence of these beings or little entities, definitely with ayahuasca, the presence, the mother spirit, the abuela. Do you feel that acid also has that kind of presence and that kind of spirit, basically, that you can kind of connect to and communicate with or is it like different from that perspective to, let's say, compared to mushrooms?
Well, LSD just connects you right to God. It's like natural and natural. LSD is just God that tricked its way onto paper. So it's a direct line to the divine, as far as I can tell, which is great. which is really my favorite. I like to, this is, non-denominational, of course, but like I like standing in the presence of the Lord. There's something, about it that works for me. How is something terrifying and comforting at the same time, and just so exalted, pure light and love in a way that is really kind of inspiring. We were talking about like, what inspires you to service, and it's like, well, just the purity of it. The intention starts to become like, how do I just set myself up in this human vehicle to be able to channel more of that through my nervous system. Like I just want to channel God into this dimension.
Do you think, that is there such things as too much medicine, or taking psychedelic substances, medicines, plants too often? Obviously there are some contraindications for certain people with certain conditions, but apart from that, Like, what's your view? Because that's, I also see in the community gets pretty divided, you know, on this question. You raise also the sustainability aspect as well. So yeah, what do you think about it?
You've met people who've taken too many drugs. They're out there. I'm not so sure about myself sometimes, but I've slowed down a lot by old age, for sure. There's people who get themselves burnt out. I mean, some have a harder body load than others, right? Some molecules are more intense on the body than others. But also, we stretch our mind and our consciousness into contortions, right? It's like we're really, yeah, we're stretching our minds very, very wide, very far. And that's not always a great thing. Sometimes things are terrifying, and then people have anxiety issues, right? And sometimes people just have psychotic thoughts and they don't know how to square them with reality. Um, I feel very glad that I'm pretty comfortable with my psychotic thoughts at this time. So it's like, probably like all my friends aren't actually trying to kill me. Okay. It's like, fair enough. It seemed like it for a minute, but I think probably not. And so all kinds of the mind can go weird all kinds of ways, and then people start thinking they're interdimensional shamans, and then that's fine. As long as it doesn't like bring a certain kind of entitlement. So like various forms of like anxieties and entitlements and all kind. I mean, the mind is, it's both resilient and fragile. There's that old joke about Keith Richards and Keith Moon. Do you know these guys? They're old rock stars from the day. Keith Moon was the drummer for The Who, and he was wild and he did a lot of drugs and he died young, right? Keith Richards, the guitarist for the Rolling Stones, was wild and did a lot of drugs and seems immortal. The joke says, we all should recycle because we want to make sure we leave a good world for Keith Richards, right? He's in his 70s and he's leathery, but he's like resilient. He's not going anywhere. It doesn't seem like. But so, we don't know how we're going to react to these things, right? And people chase experiences. I was talking about like standing in the presence of the Lord, right? Being, being able to get in, all of a sudden you're in heaven. But then it's like, oh, your time in heaven's actually over, and you realize like, and that's kind of an upsetting fall, that fall from grace, where it's like you actually can't stay here because you've got work to do for the world, but you also have work to do on yourself. You're actually not kind enough and generous enough and wise enough and heartful enough to actually stay in heaven, right? You snuck in and you got to go back. And that's painful to have to look at. And so sometimes people think, well, if I just take more sacraments, then I'll work it out and I'll get to go to heaven. Whereas it's sometimes more likely that, there's a good chance that you'll go insane before you get to heaven.
Are you living with depression, anxiety, PTSD, chronic disease and pain, or mysterious illness that you cannot explain? Have you tried therapy, medications, wellness retreats, only to find yourself back in the same place? I know that place. And that's why I created ayahuasca-assisted therapy, a powerful, trauma-informed, transformational framework that helped me and countless of others when nothing else worked. This isn't a quick fix. It's deep inner work that gets you to the root of your suffering and creates fundamental and lasting change. This isn't about escaping your pain. It's about facing it and transforming it with courage, with support, and with the power of sacred plant medicine. If you are tired of surviving and repeating the same story over and over again, and if you are ready to thrive and fully embrace your life, let's talk. Book your free consultation today at avatarhealingarts.com. Let's do this together. Your new beginning starts now. Yes, I deeply resonate with that. And thank you for sharing that. And I guess that's where integration work comes in. And when I started with the medicine 13 years ago, it was not a concept that I was familiar with. And I'm glad to see that it gains more popularity and people are more conscious and aware of this. So I would love to know what is kind of your definition of integration work, or how would you define what does that mean? Because people have like all kinds of ideas. Some people think that having one circle after the retreat or ceremony of integration, that's the integration work. And what are the tools that you personally use and also teach in your program to people who support this kind of work outside of the ceremony container?
In a word, I'm looking to transform experience into insight. Right? We had an experience. It was a wild experience, whatever it was, right? And maybe it rewired you a little bit, and maybe it purified you a little bit, and you dealt with some stuff, but did you really gain insight, right, about the nature of your predicament and also the true nature of who you are? Integration, there's a lot of things happening, is what is really going on, right? So there seems to be a lot going on with us, right? If we're in the relative dual plane, right? Because there's the non-duality that we talked about, where like everything's perfect and you're perfect and that's great, but that's not actually like our experience most of the time, right? We usually experience ourselves as a complex, right? A complex organism with complex parts. I like to make sure that folks are looking at the confusing data that comes in from a lot of different angles and allowing them the space to make deep connections, but giving yourself kind of the space to breathe through a variety of perspectives. And then, since we're a complex, there are parts of ourselves that are seemingly at odds with each other. Like we're not always coherent in our needs and desires and our fears. It's like, I want that, but I'm afraid of it at the same time. Well, it's like, how do we square that? And so how do we have conversations within ourselves to make peace, right? When there's certain parts that are mad at other parts, and there's certain parts that are, repressed because we've decided that they're unlovable. Oh, if I show you this part of me, you're not going to like me, so I better hide it. And then that part festers and ends up making a lot of decisions for us. It's like, oh, I don't want to be that, but we can't help it because it comes out. Sometimes we have to integrate our personal history, right? So, I've got this coaching training program. I have a therapist uh, works with a lot of abuse survivors and things like that, who talks about repressed memories, right? And repressed memories sometimes comes up, and holding space for that and giving people, the chance to create safety for these parts that are like so hurt and wounded that they don't even know where to begin to heal. We want experience to become insight. We want that insight to become wisdom and compassion and intuition and presence.
Yes, and I would add to transform it into behavior in your everyday life in the end, right? As you said, that your everyday behavior change, your diet, your, activities, the way you approach things. And I think, that's kind of for me the last step of that integration, when you embodied that, all of that you describe, and it becomes behavior, and you will act differently in the face of the same challenges, right? So I think that's like super important. And I deeply believe that if you don't do that work, then you are heading into the wrong direction. Because like, unfortunately, I think, like, naively, I thought as well at the beginning that the medicine will heal me, that I will just go to the ceremony and then I will be enlightened and healed and all my troubles will go away. And that's okay. I think that's part of the journey, that kind of naivete at the beginning. But really, I think these substances and plants are just portals that expand our awareness, so we can see what we need to address, what we need to work on, what we need to change. And sometimes those things can be really, really hard to face and integrate, as you said. And I personally went through, recovering suppressed memories that were suppressed into amnesia about horrible things that happened in my childhood, and that was pretty intense, to kind of, process that like many years later. And this is just one aspect, but I think, what I see a lot in the community, that this kind of spiritual bypassing, when people, when they start feeling coming off the high after the experience, and the problems and the challenges come back into their life, they just, okay, let's go back for another trip, instead of addressing or looking or going deeper into what is brought to the surface, so you can truly make a significant change. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
People will sometimes come to me and say things like, how long do I have to integrate before my next journey? And I'm like, honey, it's not a punishment. But what's the point of your integration, right? It's like we're mining for gold here. People are like fractals. And if you ask the right questions, if you zoom in the right places, you're going to get really interesting, beautiful things. So I show my student how to take notes and to listen for the places to zoom in. And we practice, somebody will share a trip report, and then each person gets a chance to ask them questions, to, coach them for a bit. And what's cool is that each coach hears something different that's interesting to them to ask about. So that's the fun thing about fractal inquiry, is that, the two principles for asking good questions is that it's one, something that you're actually interested in as the coach, and two, something that you believe will raise the awareness of the client, right? And so we all have different kinds of curiosities. And so when I ask the person questions, they have different insights. When, Sally asks questions, they have different insights. And when Peter asks questions, they have different insights. And so we see that there's kind of this never ending brilliance and beauty and awareness that is available to the client, available to all of us. So, everybody's a grown up. They can, again, can do whatever you want. You can gobble down whatever molecules you want, and God bless. If learning from your experience, then slow down. If you think it's fun, to, do peyote, do peyote. No, go ahead. It takes a certain type of person to want to delve into those things deeper, right? And I don't have any trip. I've got plenty of friends that I've known for, how old am I now? That I've known for 35 years, and they do things differently than I do. And sometimes I look at them and I'm like, I wish I could have that much fun still, you know. Sometimes I do, but they really are having fun. They're partying. And, I'm not so good. I'm not so good at partying as they are. Everything is tinged with like a little bit of work. And sometimes I wish it wasn't. Um, but it takes a certain kind of person to want to, you know, journal about this stuff and take it apart and look at themselves. And it's beautiful when somebody does. And it's, just as beautiful to watch somebody dance their ass off.
Absolutely. It deeply touched me what you shared, because personally, my experience, I completely lost that fun aspect of the mushrooms. I just go into process and I like don't want to be social. It's not funny to me, and before, like long time ago, I had such a great time, and yeah, I guess it's not my path anymore, but that's okay. And all path leads to the same place, right? So we are not here to
Well,
do.
yeah, we're not here to judge. Well, and that is why God saw fit to bless us with MDMA, and dance parties. It's like sometimes, one of my coaches recently prescribed, he was like, it's you're really going through it right now. You're really churning up a lot of stuff and you're working really hard. And I want you to think about maybe just taking some MDMA and dancing with your friends. So that was prescribed to me by my elder.
It's very interesting that you say that, because the last couple of months, this was one of the big messages that I received from the medicine, from the ayahuasca, to lighten up, to play more, to laugh more, to dance more, because I'm like so focused into the shadow work and uprooting suffering and, all kinds of things. And it has to be in balance. And we are here in the end is to enjoy this experience, right? As much as we can. So you can get out of balance like both ways, and just because you are always into therapy, that doesn't mean that you are some kind of superior being or you are doing better than others. So I'm really grateful that you brought up this point. And also I would like to talk before we finish about the idea of service work and responsibility, because I think it's natural, when we go down on this path and you have certain experiences, a natural desire arises that you want to share it with others. You want to support others, to get to the same place, to get, the results, that they are wanting. And that's all good. And I know so many people who never intended to get into this kind of service work, but it was just like a natural unfolding of their journey and their path. On the other hand, I think it's important that we understand that to support others and to hold space for others is a great responsibility. It's a great honor, but it's a greater responsibility. And I feel that sometimes what happens is that people want the power from an ego place, as you said, I'm now an interdimensional shaman, but they don't want to take the responsibility that comes with it. And oftentimes I see even on social media, people who had like two experiences, like some transformational experience, and now they are offering to coach and help others and do therapy for other people out of good intentions, not necessarily, hey, I want to cause you harm or anything else. But I think it's important that you need to be prepared for this work, and you need to have certain tools and qualities and trainings and stuff that will allow you to effectively and safely hold space for others. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about your training program and how you support other people, to recognize that and to find that balance of, effectively help others and taking that huge responsibility that comes with stepping into this role and into this kind of service work.
So that's important. So you said it all. You answered your own question. That's really important. Because a lot of the times we do have the good intentions, we have good heart, we have high consciousness, but we don't always necessarily have the skills and the traits. There's something that they say in AA. They say a daily reprieve based on your spiritual condition, right? Because sometimes also the other side of that is sometimes people think that, oh, I have to be fixed and healed and enlightened before I can do anything. And what I have found is that, if you have some training, right, and you're doing your work every day, you're good. Like, it's like nobody expects you to be enlightened, but everybody expects you to be doing what you're supposed to be doing that day. So if I do the things that I'm supposed to do, then I'm allowed to show up for people. However, I also, like I said at the beginning, it was like 1998, and the acid was like, you go out and heal the world now. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And so it was like, they were like, okay, well, you just go figure that out now. I was young too. I was 23, 20, I was 22, 23. And so, I was just coming out of college. And so I was like, okay, I was a learner. And I kind of knew that I didn't really want to be in college anymore. I didn't want a master's degree. So I got myself to like a yoga studio that had like real teachers and workshops and things like that. So I spent my time on the mat and on the cushion in front of elders, training and studying and taking various certs. And so, one of the things that I suggest to folks is to train. I had this one little kid in my little kid, he's 19 or something. He would come to integration circles, and he was like working in a pet store or something. And he was like, I was like, what do I do in my path? And I was like, okay, you're young, cute, 19-year-old kid. Find every yoga studio and massage therapy school in your area and ask them for a work trade scholarship. Just send out an email being like, I'm interested in this. I'll sweep the floor. Can you train me? And he was like, you can do that? I was like, yes, you can. I was like, do that, see what happens. And he's a yoga teacher now. He did it and he trained, and I think he's in another training now. And that's fabulous. On the flip side, also, because these things again always go in pairs, there's that archetype of like the devouring mother, right? Whereas it's like anxiety disguised as love. And so we've a lot of people out here who are so worried that like, oh, I'm going to cause harm. Oh, I'm going to create some damage. Oh, I'm going to like, I have to be perfect. I have to like really, that kind of energy. You can probably hear it in my voice. And if you're watching, you can see the lack of flow in my limbs. And one of my students in the program was like, she was like, I know that I'm committed to being good, and I know that I'm committed to being ethical and to continue learning and to grow as a person as I grow as a coach. But I need to cultivate more ease. Like I need to be easeful about this. And since we know that people in psychedelic states or recently in psychedelic states are very sensitive and suggestible. They're very sensitive to our energy and to our mannerisms and stuff like that. So our anxiety and lack of confidence comes through, and it ruins the soup. And so we don't want to do that. We want, like you're saying, like the medicine says, take it easy, take it easy. Like people have been sitting for each other. People have been successfully eating mushrooms with their friends and their families for hundreds of thousands of years. Like it's chill.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate. And we're gonna put your availabilities, your website, your offerings, everything, the links, in the description so people can find you if they feel to go deeper with you or participate in any of your offerings. Is there anything that you would like to highlight before we leave?
No, I mean, I'm easy to find. If you search for Tam Integration, I'll come up. You search for my name, I'll come up. And I just appreciate it. How did I do? Did you okay?
Yes, I mean, there is no specific expectation. It's just, be
Okay.
who you are and show up in that authentic. And I think you definitely did that 100%. And I appreciate you coming in that vulnerability and sharing from that space. So thank you very much. I enjoyed our
Yeah.
conversation.
Well, thank you. I did too. And, thank you to all your listeners. Maybe I'll see you around.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, if you like this podcast, please leave a comment or contact us if you need further support or assistance. And I hope you enjoyed. And until we see you next time, have a beautiful and blessed day.